Hey everyone, Michael here, founder and CEO of /dev.io, and I'm here with my colleague Emmanuel on the second episode of our Future Ventures Lab podcast. And we're going to be diving into some interesting topics today, ranging from a deep dive into robotics. We'll talk about Bitcoin, we'll talk about Chinese EVs, we'll dive into hiring in Mexico, and a few other topics to really give you a good overview of what's going on in tech right now. So yeah, let's kick it off. So to start out, let's do a deep dive into robotics and what's going on really if we focus on humanoid robotics. So when we look at the humanoid robotic market and what's happening, there's a few key players, right? So we've got Boston Dynamics, we've got Tesla, Figure AI, as well as UB Tech. And so if we look at what Jensen, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA, has to say about where AI is going, he was quoted in the Financial Times saying the next wave of AI is physical AI, AI that understands the laws of physics, AI that can work among us. So what we see is these LLMs have improved massively. We can't really imagine our life without these things. Like when we run out of tokens on these LLMs, it really makes us feel stupid and not have access to the world's information at our fingertips anymore. And what you're going to see is we're expecting to see a lot of these gains affect the usefulness of humanoid robotics. So we've obviously had industrial robots for a very long time, but we're starting to see much faster advancement in what humanoid robotics can do, because things like cleaning the kitchen, making dinner, folding laundry are actually really hard robotics problems. And so now we're starting to see robots like Optimus from Tesla and others be able to do some of these tasks at prices that are very reasonable. And in addition, we're also talking about having some of these LLMs in these robots, and who wouldn't want that? I mean, if you're reading a book, if you're thinking about something you want to understand, you want an LLM right there to help you learn it faster. It's like trying to learn with encyclopedias versus learning with the internet. This is just the new modality of learning fast. And so if we dive into Boston Dynamics first, these guys have obviously been around for a very long time. So Boston Dynamics was founded in 1992. They were kind of the pioneers of this. Videos on the internet have been going around forever of Boston Dynamics robots running around, and they really broke out with their Spot robotic dog that has been very successful. But the price point on these things is much higher. I mean, I think Spot runs like 70,000 or something for their robot dog, which is just too expensive for most consumers, but still leading the way in a lot of functionality and research in this space. So why don't we just quickly take a look at the latest Atlas robot, because I think that's really cool to see. So let me add that to the screen here. And Emmanuel, feel free to add anything as we go.
Yeah, I mean, you're about to show it, but I think this is like, I don't know, it seems kind of surreal when you just see this up front right now. I mean, I remember watching these videos from Boston Dynamics back in the days, like 10 years ago, and you would see like these robots on wires trying to like do their first steps, and yeah, now we're about to see where we're at right now. So
Yeah, they're like dangling from the ceiling so that they don't fall over.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
now we have this. So yeah, let's take a look. So I mean, the form factor is so much smaller now too.
The way it moves its limbs
That's
is
like how like a
crazy.
Terminator would get up, right? Like it's like
Exactly.
breaking the legs as it stands up. Yeah, there we go. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, so that's a great example of the new Atlas robot. And, I think really to get into what I think is most impressive about this, we need to kind of talk about Tesla and what they're doing, because I think Elon gives the best guidance on where this technology is going, being an entrepreneur who is rooted in engineering and product. He really understands this better than anyone. But Elon is expecting Optimus to cost like $20,000-$30,000 or less per robot. And that's a price where we really start thinking that many people could have Optimus robots in their home, doing construction jobs, helping on the farm, really revolutionizing the way we do things. So, speaking of revolutionizing, basically, Tesla's aiming to revolutionize human robot collaboration through their humanoid Tesla bot Optimus. They aim to apply these humanoids in various tasks, but current challenges are keeping the humanoid cost effective and ethically pleasing to society. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I touched on. Like, I think the cost effectiveness is really going to be a big thing. I mean, if we start getting these down to like $10,000 per robot, it's going to be insane. And basically, Elon is saying that he expects this to be the largest product in the world. So billions of robots sold, and really outpacing the number of humans. So significantly, I mean, this would basically, which seems crazy, but he thinks this will beat out like smartphones, which are incredibly numerous throughout the world. So I don't know. Can you imagine a world where these things are doing all the labor jobs and making society way more productive? Or do you think lots of people just see like the downsides of these robots and see it as like a dystopian future?
Yeah. Touching upon also that, the ethical aspect. I think it's a 50-50 somewhere. I mean, I can see how people might see the negative aspects of it, but then also I can see how it can be very well used in like manufacturing and maybe providing a better efficiency as well with
Mm-hmm.
labor. But talking about the ethical aspect, I think I'm not sure if you've watched it, iRobot. Have you seen that movie,
Oh yeah.
iRobot? Yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
think a lot of people who might not be as tech savvy or within engineering, I think it's a little bit harder to convince them that this is where the future is going, because a lot of people might have that notion of, okay, we're gonna land into a dystopian future, uh, just like iRobot. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that has to be taken into consideration when especially Tesla is now developing Optimus.
Yeah, I mean, definitely like the risks evolve, right? And if you know anything about cybersecurity, you know that nothing connected to the internet is safe. And so you have the risk of like 0-day vulnerabilities and these robots getting hacked by malicious actors. Typically, to be able to hack like really advanced systems, you need to be a nation state who's actually got a program researching, purchasing, and digging up and building a bank of these 0-day exploits. But if you look at some of the biggest cyber attacks in the world, it's incredible what has been done. So you can imagine what could happen when there's robots like this. But of course, like there's always going to be ways that we can think of better ways to build society and to protect ourselves from those outcomes. So we can't not embrace new technology because other people will embrace it. So I think we just need to keep building. But this is also really interesting to see here. This was from the Tesla event a few months ago. And here you can see Optimus actually serving drinks at the event with a cowboy hat on, of course. God, that's awesome. Yeah. So, you know,
I
these are
feel
all
like,
demos, right? But I mean, where are we going to be in 5 years with this? You know, things are moving so fast. And these aren't even using the latest LLM models to communicate with you. Like, I think it's so cool that you can just ask LLMs anything, and they're like a fairly smart person who knows everything about the world. So imagine when you can have your robot dog or whatever that can teach your kid about physics or about fluid dynamics or about engineering, about a foreign language. It's really going to be incredible to see the speed of learning that you're going to be able to achieve. Cool stuff. All right, so that brings us to another new player in the space, Figure AI. Also very one of the top players in the US, probably, you know, right behind. It's hard to say who's ahead right now, right? So, you know, right there with Optimus and Tesla. They've partnered with OpenAI to actually integrate their LLMs and all the tools that OpenAI has into these robots, which is really cool. And I know that they just did their first commercial shipment of these robots into the real world. So, you know, Elon isn't selling Optimus yet, but he's hoping he can get like, you know, $20,000-$30,000 per robot. I believe these are estimated to be like $30,000 to $70,000 we found, so unconfirmed data, but you know, ballpark what we can find. A bit more expensive still, but as you ramp up production and start producing these, you should be able to get this to a better price point to where more people can use them. All right. Yeah, so I mean, not a whole lot of new stuff here about Figure. I mean, you know, these are obviously they're right there with Optimus, so they're using the most advanced sensors and technology. The partnership with OpenAI is really cool. That obviously comes with a lot of Microsoft collaboration as well, being that Microsoft is like 49% owner of OpenAI. So there's a lot of cool stuff that can happen here as well. And I definitely think they'll be a big player in the space. Okay. And that brings us to kind of the competition. And of course, who in the world is dominating robotics, electronics? It's going to be China. And UBTech is building a lot of great robots out of China. So the thing about China is they are dominating this category. They've been dominating manufacturing. They have half of the world's industrial robots that work in manufacturing. They build nearly all the electronics that we're using right now. And of course, they have all the infrastructure then to dominate this robot industry. So UBTech's building some, basically their robot looks very similar to Figure and Optimus, similar form factors. Really, Atlas looks a bit different, I would say, than the others with the mobility it has in the hips to be able to get up and do some of those things. But in terms of what UBTech, Figure, and Optimus are doing, fairly similar. The thing that I think is really just going to be a deciding factor for this robotics category, as well as for EVs, which we're going to talk about, is who can build the best product for the best price. And it's going to be really hard to compete with China on price in the near future. We have to build stronger supply chains and really have a focus on building things in the West again. And so this is going to be a big push. We're seeing the US already really take a big push on this, and you're seeing a lot of talk in Europe about what can be done. But I think the reality is like drones and robotics are also the future of warfare and defense. And so you're going to see a lot of nations really want to embrace this to make sure that we can defend the world and maintain peace, because the tables are shifting, right? Like an aircraft carrier is not so valuable anymore if you have an ocean full of undersea drone swarms. So this is going to be really interesting to see like how we start manufacturing and building great products again in the West. Maybe it's not going to move all the way back to building in the US or building, in some of the most advanced European countries, but can we bring it closer and can we own more of the supply chain? And also, can we build the best product at the best price at the end of the day as well? So, yeah, that's kind of my takeaway on the robotics category. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts as well on that, Emmanuel.
Uh, mm, not closing thoughts, but I just in front of me I have lines and speculative numbers in regards to the price for the UBTech Walker S series, and it seems to be on the more expensive side of around 75,000 USD. But again, I think these are all from speculative sources. But just as you mentioned, I mean, in the coming future, they'll be able to ramp down the prices as well. But I think
Yeah,
for this specific model, the Walker S from Ubitech, I think they mentioned it was another speculative source mentioning specifically about how advanced its capabilities are, which is the reasoning for its higher price point. So I'm not even sure if considering its capabilities, that this is actually cheaper than most. But
yeah,
I mean, it would be interesting, just as you said, if we can, if the Western countries can also start managing to produce some really good products out there, really good humanoid robotics.
yeah. I just think thinking from first principles and looking at like what's already out there, China can build things at like half the price. So, you know, Spot, the robot dog from Boston Dynamics, is like 70,000, and you can get one from China for like 20,000, 10,000. So, that's the supply chain and the cost profile that we're looking at competing with if we want to be able to build these products in the West. So, I don't think they're really selling this Walker one yet because these humanoid robots haven't yet really, everyone's in the early days. They're finding partners to test these out with and see if they can provide value. But in the next 5 years, we're going to see more and more of these roll out. So super interesting and excited to see this and hopefully get to work with some of these in the future because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, cool. So that brings us over to Bitcoin. Bitcoin crossed 100K, peaking at about $103,000. And this was a hot topic, and everyone has been talking about Bitcoin, whether it is going to be used as a reserve asset for different countries, whether it's a bubble and it's going to zero. There's opinions from, every end of that debate. So it's really interesting to see. Basically, Michael Saylor has been one of the biggest advocates for Bitcoin, the CEO of MicroStrategy. He's been all over talking about it. I think what's interesting to talk about when it comes to Bitcoin is really when you look at like the global adoption of Bitcoin, really the US is still very far behind other countries in terms of adopting Bitcoin. So I want to say that South Korea has like double the crypto adoption of the US because for the past 4 years, we've had an SEC chairman who has basically tried to kill the crypto industry. And there's a lot of debate on what DeFi, what Bitcoin can be. I personally am a big believer in what this can be. When you look at countries that don't have stable currencies, DeFi is like a saving grace to be able to actually put their money somewhere where it's secure and they have control of it versus putting it into their home currency. That's why you see countries like India, Nigeria, Indonesia being some of the top adopters of cryptocurrency around the world. So why don't I just quickly share my screen again and show some of the global adoption of crypto. All right, cool. So yeah, as you can see, India being labeled as the top adopter of crypto in the world through this, but you can see a lot of like Southeast Asia, Nigeria being a big adopter of cryptocurrency, and the US, who's usually a leader in new technologies, lagging quite a bit behind. Europe lagging even further behind in terms of crypto adoption. So really interesting to see. here's the breakdown of where countries are landing on this. I think it's a very complex topic. At the end of the day, it's very speculative. Like, this isn't a traditional investment in Bitcoin that has a cash flow like a stock. This is a store of value, and it's a digital store of value. So it makes sense that Bitcoin might not always be this great store of value. We might move to something else. But it certainly makes sense that DeFi sticks around as kind of a libertarian check and balance to centralized banking systems and control structures. But if we look at Bitcoin and kind of think about where it could go, if we just get a little bit optimistic here for a little bit and look at like gold's market cap, if we think that Bitcoin is going to compare to gold someday as a store of value, which realistically there's more and more gold that could be mined, right? So whenever the price of gold goes up, you can mine more of it, and then that kind of stabilizes the price. So the price of a house in terms of gold is basically the same as it was like 50 years ago. It just maintains a really stable value. But the thing is, Bitcoin has a limited supply, right? And we're talking about a world where inflation is maybe 2 to 5 to 8% per year. And Bitcoin's definitely going to outpace inflation. Gold usually outpaces inflation by a little bit. So we could see Bitcoin returning 8-10% a year on average, even once it reaches maturity. But you're certainly going to have a lot of swings up and down along the way. Ultimately, I think you'd probably want to reevaluate your hypothesis once it gets to a more stable market cap. But based on Bitcoin adoption, I think it still has a long way to go. So let's see if I grab that information on Bitcoin adoption. I know I can find it. And I don't know if you have anything to add here, Emmanuel, while I try to dig this graphic up.
This is a little bit out of my scope, but I think if you go back to that graph that you showed just now, I think it was a hell of a year for Bitcoin in 2024. I mean, it's been a crazy ride for people who stuck to it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Bitcoin has been the best asset you could possibly hold, right? So it's been insane. And like the risk with that is like, you don't want to like buy something in a bubble, right? So you really have to like understand what you want to do. And obviously this isn't investment advice, so make your own decision and decide if you want to believe in Bitcoin and the broader ecosystem of what it can be. This is kind of what I wanted to showcase, right? Like Bitcoin adoption versus the internet. So we're still in like let's say we're in 2000 or something, because this is 2023, right? But the number of people who own Bitcoin is still much less than have access to the internet. So we're still in the early days of adoption of Bitcoin. And from what I can see from all the major financial institutions, we've cleared all the hurdles to making this a mainstream asset. I mean, you have Larry Fink talking about it being a store of value. You have ETFs now. You have the ability for pension funds and endowment funds to own Bitcoin. So I think there's still a lot of room for this to run. But what I think is really exciting about DeFi and crypto as a whole is the ability to really own your own money and not have governments or bad actors be able to just seize it from you, freeze your bank accounts, etc. So you can do really cool things with Bitcoin, like cold storage wallets, where you can literally download your Bitcoin onto a USB drive and take it wherever you want, and it's your money. And there's no way to follow you and try to collect that money, right? So it really gives you that like libertarian power over your money that I think, especially like me being from the US, there's a lot of roots of those types of values in the US, to where you don't want the government telling you what to do with your cash or your gold. So it's the same for Bitcoin. And I think that's why you see countries like India, Nigeria, anywhere where there's not like stable government. Latin America has huge adoption of crypto. Obviously, I believe it's Ecuador who literally runs their country on Bitcoin, right? So it'll be really interesting to see. But cool to pass the 100K milestone. I'm sure we'll have lots of booms and busts from here, and excited to see where this goes. All right, so now we're going to dive into some news on quantum chips and quantum computing. So this week was a big week for news on quantum computing. IBM released some new quantum computing tech, as well as Google released Willow. And so Sundar tweeted about this, kind of breaking down some of the functionality of Willow. And, at the end of the day, I think this is a lot of like marketing and hype still because it's still such early days. Basically, Willow was able to solve a problem that would take a regular computer the same amount of time as the age of the universe, right? So that sounds really impressive, right? But and this is really impressive tech that has a lot of potential. So I worked with the quantum key network at Ericsson previously in Sweden, where they were building the first quantum key distribution network that was basically being able to send quantum photons from one endpoint to another and be able to transfer that information. And you see a lot of progress in quantum computing, a lot of hype about maybe this is going to allow AI to take off. Maybe this is going to break the internet, because everything we're doing right now is through encryption, so that all of our data isn't just broadcasted over the internet. And if quantum computers can crack that, then we have no more security, right? But then we could just encrypt things with quantum computers if it really gets to that. But anyways, if we try to dive into this and quickly summarize what happened here, on a very complex topic, I must say, so forgive me, but I'll do my best to try to give some information here that's relevant. But basically, a traditional computer operates on zeros and ones, right? And a quantum computer operates with qubits, which are able to represent a vector of zeros and ones, basically a probability distribution, which allows them to transfer a lot more data in that word, as it's called, of 64 bits than a traditional computer would be able to do. And so this is why they're able to solve much more complex problems. But really, the problem Willow solved was a problem that had quantum nature to it, right? So if you want to understand quantum mechanics, you got to go try to read about it and then maybe bang your head against it for another few weeks and you might get somewhere, right? And there's, if I try to dumb this down a little bit, basically, when you're looking at what quantum computers can solve, they're finding algorithms that are very well suited to these types of compute systems. And these compute problems are very hard for traditional computers to solve, but quantum computers are able to solve them. So you're not seeing, and also these chips are operating at like absolute zero. They're incredibly expensive. They have a high error rate. Willow made some progress on that as well. So we're still a long ways away, I would say, from quantum computers really entering the mainstream. But then again, this is an awesome area of technology, and it's cool to see Google pushing it forward, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I would say on this. Emmanuel, do you have any thoughts on quantum computing, or what's your impression of this?
Uh, no, I don't have any thoughts on this at all. I've just been listening to you talk about this topic. It makes it more understandable because I remember looking into it, and yeah, I mean, I saw qubits and I was like, what is that? How does this
Yeah,
work? And what problems do quantum computers actually solve? That's something that I was always very curious about. And yeah, but you make it sound a lot better, you know.
yeah. So, I mean, they could be really useful for like being able to model like really complex physics in the real world. They could be, there's certain quantum things that happen with like light. So if you're trying to analyze how light is going to transfer through like an ice cube, quantum computers could give you a really good way of estimating the like how that light is going to disperse through that. It just gets into like really nerdy, really scientifical stuff, which is often how these things start out, right? But then basically, if they can get this error rate lower and scale this up, that's when it gets more and more interesting. So if we start to be able to, one thing is they're only able to keep that qubit in that state for like, I should have the data in front of me, but I want to say like 20 milliseconds or even smaller. Basically, Google like 5x the amount of time they could keep the qubit in that state, which then allows you to have like a lower error rate and be able to observe it better. So, a lot of great progress in the space, still very early days. I think this is just one of those things that kind of blows up as well in the tech space because it's so hard to understand and it sounds so futuristic. It's kind of like we're calling LLMs artificial intelligence when they're really just like matrix multiplication on a massive network of nodes with like gradient descent for training. So we don't actually have like a cognizant intelligence behind ChatGPT or any of these. We understand so little about the brain, but it gets hyped because it has the name AI, right? So really exciting to see. I mean, I think quantum's awesome, but I think we're probably still 5-10 years away from really seeing some good applications.
I,
That's not too long though. So yeah.
I have a question about this for you. Where
Yeah.
do you think the future will be going to when it comes to quantum chips? Where will we see the future of these? I mean, I'm not that smart uh, about quantum chips, but like, where do you see this? Will it be commercialized at some point, or how does this work?
Yeah, so I mean, once they're able to produce these at a point where they can really solve certain algorithms at a high clip, things like Bitcoin's encryption are something that a quantum computer would be really good at solving potentially. So that's like a huge risk to Bitcoin, right? Like if their encryption is able to be cracked by quantum computers, then you would need a quantum type of algorithm, encryption rather, encryption algorithm to secure the network. So I think that's probably going to be like one big shift once these get useful is it's basically a much more powerful type of computer that creates a problem solving ability we haven't seen before. And since they're able to solve lots of modern encryption, it requires that we kind of re-encrypt the internet based on this. That's one thing I see. You also could see artificial intelligence training. So we're going to talk about XAI and what's going on there. But if you're able to train a neural network on a quantum cluster and it's able to have much more parallelism, basically in a neural network that's training, every single GPU needs to know what every other GPU in the cluster is solving and what they're doing. And quantum chips can do that through quantum entanglement, which allows them to know what the other qubits are doing, right? So it has potential there to solve that. But again, you know, I'm just a layman in this space. So these are just kind of my observations. And ultimately, I think, let's just root for the people who are building this. And then once there's some practical applications, let's get to building, right? So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, interesting.
All right, cool. So Chinese EVs. Emmanuel, maybe you could just give us an overview of this topic and what we're going to go into here.
Yeah, so Chinese EVs getting cancelled? Question mark. I think maybe that's a bit of a maybe that's a bit going too far a little bit, but yeah, I mean, so basically what happened is that the EU started to implement tariffs on electric vehicle imports. And I think we mentioned it before also, like when we were talking about this backstage, but like 45% increase in tariffs on electric vehicles, right? And then there was basically these Chinese electric vehicles who are now shifting. I mean, I can quote it right here. They're shifting toward plug-in hybrids as a way to sidestep the new EU tariffs on
Yeah.
battery-powered EVs
Yep.
imports. So yeah, so that's currently going on in this space, and yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, we can talk a little bit about this too.
Exactly. So it was in October that the EU's tariffs came into effect. So we're talking about, I believe, up to like 45% tariffs at the high end on EVs, depending on the company. And this is basically just trying to preserve the EU auto industry in the face of extremely good and extremely cheap Chinese electric vehicles. I think it's really funny that China just does a little shake and bake and says, all right, we'll sell hybrids and still sells into the EU. It just, shows how fast they are to just switch the strategy and still make some money, and how slow it is for these regulations and tariffs to really like have the effect you want when it takes so long to make decisions on them. So I think this is really relevant because we have like Europe is so rooted in the automobile industry, Germany particularly, obviously, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, just huge brands in the auto industry, right? And they're trying to compete against China, the US, Japan, Korea, others to really build the best cars at the best value. And what you're seeing, I think you're seeing a lot of this because you're witnessing like the real-time collapse of Germany's industrial production, right? So if we look at Germany's industrial production here, since this is 2017 over at the top left of this red line down to 2024, like 12% drop off from 6.5 years ago in industrial production. And when you look at how Germany fueled their factories, it was through Russian gas. And so when you had the war in Ukraine kick off and the cutoff of Russian gas, this has really hurt the German industrial engine and their ability to compete, as well as just regulation in Europe. As we've seen Draghi state, as we've seen the CEO of Ericsson state, as we've seen other European tech founders on X state, regulation in the EU and holding companies back from competing is killing competitiveness and the ability to build good products. So I believe right now Volkswagen is potentially going to have to shut down some plants in Germany. And so the employees are striking so that they don't shut down the plants, which, of course, when a plant is almost bankrupt and you go on strike to stop them from shutting it down, it doesn't help the fundamentals of the business. And so to me, there's a little bit of a disconnect between the mindset of the European voters and politicians and what fundamentally needs to happen in terms of competition to make businesses more competitive, right? So this is kind of just a little bit of a sign of what's going to keep happening. I think is you're gonna have to try to block this to preserve existing industries, but ultimately, like these Chinese EVs cost like $10,000 or less on a cost basis to build. They sell them for like $25,000. And the strategy that Volkswagen was going for was producing less at a much higher value. And how many people are going to buy a Volkswagen at like 50, 60,000 versus a Chinese EV at like 25? So, I mean, these are really advanced. They look cool. I mean, here we have this Zeekr X. I mean, not it's not like a sedan, but it's a nice EV. Lots of people would be happy to drive this at $25,000, right? So
Yeah.
fundamentally, like you can try to block these things. And I actually think there's a really good case for blocking these, because if China doesn't let you do business in their country, why should you let them do business in your country? I kind of think of it on very simplistic terms like that. Like, if you're like running a country, if you're in total control and you're looking over at your neighbor and you say, hey, do you want to buy some of my cars? And they say, yeah, sure. And then they take all your technology, they take all your patents, they steal it all, and then they cut your company out of the country. You're probably going to quit doing business with them, right? And so we kind of got to wake up to like the different type of competition that happens here. This isn't like the Western world where it's more competition based. It's really like taking intellectual property and then the state is subsidizing specific industries to compete. So on that side of the coin, I understand, but I also think like tariffs alone are not the answer here for the EU. They need to kind of take a page from the Department of Government Efficiency's plan and start cutting regulations so that you can build again. But one thing I really worry about is the cost of electricity. So the cost of electricity is much higher in Europe, in Germany. And if you want to be able to have cost-effective industrial production, you need a low cost of electricity and you need a supply chain. So these are some really big problems to solve. Yeah, Emmanuel, what do you think? I mean, you've obviously, lived in Germany. You have some firsthand experience. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure like if it's only like these car manufacturers' fault. I also think it's also itself in Germany. We're quite slow in adopting new technology. So even if Volkswagen or Audi or Mercedes come out with these electric vehicles, I mean, if you go to Germany, they're very slow at adopting electric vehicles. But not only that, I mean, it's also with like new tech. And
Mhm.
I think previously we covered Bitcoin, and you showed the adoption rate of Bitcoin in Europe. I can fully see why Germany isn't adopting that as well as quick. Uh,
Yeah,
and I would say it's also a little bit of culture that has to play into it. I mean, Germany is also still uh, we're still a country that focuses on or primarily uses cash. We love cash. If you go to
yeah.
each person, we love the physicality of it. So
I like cash
it's
too.
uh,
Yeah,
it's a little bit tough, but something I wanted to say about the cars though. I mean, they look incredible. I mean, from my perspective,
yeah,
I mean, you look at Seeker X, and I think on the cover page we had Xpeng. I mean, you have other brands like Neo, BYD, and
yeah,
they're rolling out all these cars, and I am curious to see like how well spec they are
yeah. They're
compared to
they're
like the
better.
European
They're
cars, right?
better. That's the thing. We used to see China as like cheaper but worse, right? And
Hmm.
now what you're seeing is actually cheaper and better in certain categories, right? Like DJI has the best drones in the world, and China has the best EVs in the world. Uh, I think the best reference point I heard on this was Mark Andreessen talking about meeting with a major investor in the Middle East. One of these guys who owns the city. Whether it was, he didn't say the name.
Yeah.
Uh, maybe it was actually one of the princes. But basically, this guy has a collection of luxury cars, right? He's got all the BMWs, he's got all the Mercedes, he's got the Teslas, he's got everything. And he replaced his daily driver fleet, his little entourage of cars that drive him around, with Chinese EVs because they're the nicest with the most features. I mean, these are like the affordable ones, but the luxury ones, like the seats, like rotate for you so you can get in. They're full of features. They've got all the latest tech. So it's not like these are just the cheapest options. These are also the nicest EVs. And it's just we don't really have that perspective because we're kind of blocking these out of the Western markets. But that's kind of the concern as well, is we're losing on quality and on cost, right? So yeah, awesome. Yeah, so really interesting. ultimately, the auto industry is not my favorite industry. Most auto companies go bankrupt. I think there's better things that countries can focus on in addition to this, but really interesting to see what happens. This is obviously like a big cultural industry for Europe and the backbone of a lot of the European industrial production.
Yeah. But sorry,
Cool.
can we just go back to
Yeah.
one more thing about this one? Yeah, I mean, just as you mentioned before about the price, about the cars, I have here a quote from CNN as well, and I think it actually depicts it really well. I mean, the way that these Chinese brands were able to push down their costs. This quote from CNN is basically observers are saying it's a life and death race, and I mean, it's true. I mean, we see Tesla kicked off a price war on their Model 3 and Model Y cars, right? We remember that happening. And then there is BYD asking its suppliers to cut prices by 10% next year. So
Hmm.
it really does seem like a competition, and it's most likely whoever gets out alive, kind of. So I mean, that's something I just wanted to add as well, considering the cost of these.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have to realize we don't just get to show up and build the best products and the best companies. I mean, there was a graphic circulating on Twitter of top public companies in the US versus Europe. See if I can pull that up. But basically, it just goes to show like you can't just show up and have the most value created in your country, right? Or in your trade block, right? So you have to compete and you have to build the best products and you have to have regulation that makes sense and that allows you to do mega projects and to compete at scale. And especially, I mean, Sweden has an excellent economy. They produce lots of products themselves, but Sweden can't get to the scale that they need without other really capable partners throughout the EU to help them with this, right? So I think we have to be ready to build, and business is competitive. It's not that you just show up, you build a car. People think these big companies will just always be around, right? They're like, oh, it's big business. They'll just, oh, it's Volkswagen. Like they should just be able to pay us a higher salary and have us like take long vacations. No, you have to show up and you have to build a better product. That was like the memo that Elon sent to the Tesla employees. Like, you will work in the office. You'll be there a minimum of 40 hours a week. You can go to some other company and you can work less, but when was the last time they shipped a good product? That was basically the email he sent after everyone was working remote after COVID for a little bit, right? So I think that's kind of a little bit of a mindset shift that I think it's quite different in Europe because there's so much of a social support system and people don't grind as hard in general. I mean, when I was at one of the main co-working spaces in Stockholm, I was like the only guy there on the weekend. And it's like, aren't these guys trying to build companies? Like, where are they? And it was just a ghost town on the weekend. And it's a balance, right? Like you don't necessarily want your week to be like a Chinese employee's week. You don't want to have nets on your windows so that you don't jump out like Foxconn had, but you have to compete in order to have these social systems. So I think it's going to be really interesting, and we'll see how the EU does. It's not the most natural union in terms of like the geopolitics and the geography of the countries. So we'll see how things move forward. All right, cool. So now what we want to talk about is our software topic for the week. And we want to give a brief overview on how photo and video generation work, right? So we've had the big news of OpenAI release Sora, its video generation technology. Obviously, you have players like Stable Diffusion and others who are producing videos and image generation. And so this is really cool tech. And how does it work? So basically, the way you can think of this is quite simple. And we've got a nice little video here to kind of show you. But these all run on diffusion models, right? And what you do is when you have a big enough diffusion model, as with AI, you can take you can train it on noise and have it understand, like if that picture was made out of sand and I was able to drop it and all the sand dispersed, you can teach the AI model to understand from the dispersed sand what picture that would actually be. And then from that, it starts to understand what pixels to grab to be able to generate a dog or generate a cat. And so here you're going to kind of see the noising process of training, where you kind of distort an image, and then the denoising process there, right? Of going from noise, which to a human is unreadable, but to a large network trained on millions and millions of these, they are able to then generate that image from that noisy data. And then you basically then also for the videos, you make sure that the pixels make sense as they progress so that you can go image by image and create a video and show some of that. So I think let's jump over and let's just show some of these crazy AI generated videos from Sora. And the quality of these is insane.
I mean, if we
Like,
just also look at the details, like even the very, very small details, I mean, on the jellyfish,
yeah, this one
it's really
is,
crazy.
I mean, this gets me excited for like what's going to happen in gaming and personalized movies and really the world that's going to open up from that, because you're going to be able to say like, hey, I want to watch like Star Wars, but I want like Anakin to like not go bad. I want him to just stay like a badass Jedi and team up with Yoda and like go do this. And you could literally have that generated for you, right? So it's going to be crazy to see how this works. But I mean, also, this is just like, it's just all so fun to look at because it's so unique. Like these would take like a video editor so long to make these crazy edits, and Sora can just generate these based on prompts, right? So yeah, so this is now available in the US to use to make videos. I think you're going to see more and more of this exploding on social media. You're going to see use cases for this. It's going to be really incredible to watch what can happen here. Um, just an incredible time to be into technology and programming and working with these APIs and what you can do. Um, I was researching the other day like solutions for like preserving loved ones, which is kind of crazy. But like I could have my grandmother like talk to the AI for a while, and then it would like preserve a version of her that I could chat to in the future, which is kind of creepy but kind of cool. And it's just like one of many crazy applications that we're going to be able to have, right? So yeah, super fun stuff. Do you see any like what jumps out to you about like what's going to change about the world with these, Emmanuel?
Yeah, I don't know. I think, like you mentioned, video production. I mean, I'm just looking at the physics. Like for me, I'm really interested in the details of these. I mean, like just look at the physics, how everything works, the water splash, the waves at the top right. I mean, these
Yeah,
things, I mean, maybe we'll also see, I mean, maybe we'll see movies that release quicker because of companies starting to implement uh,
right.
artificial
Yeah,
intelligence in their production. I mean, I'm really amazed by the details, like the hair dangling on the women at the side.
yeah.
Uh, it's crazy. There's like insane amount of detail, and I think that's something that that
I
we'll
mean,
maybe
just like
see
3 years
companies
ago,
use.
we were generating like images of people that were terrible, right? It was like
Exactly. Yeah.
they're like missing fingers and like, it's
Yeah.
like,
And and I think I remember like this is something that I remember as well. I think it was like 2000. I forgot, but it was before 2020. And I remember how it all started out, that we were only able to only able to generate like a small picture of a banana, which was like completely pixelated, and it was like just a 24 by 24 like resolution. I mean, it's crazy how far we've come. I mean, we're literally living inside the future, and I think I mean, that's crazy to think about.
Yeah, this is really incredible. I mean, this is also incredible because it's so fun with videos, right? Videos are so entertaining. People love to watch Netflix. They love to, game, and this is going to revolutionize all of that to where like the digital experiences we're going to be able to have are going to be incredible. So really cool to see. And that's just a brief overview for you of the noising denoising process, how that works in a very simple way. Obviously, there's a lot going on at Sora that we probably don't know about as well, and massive amounts of compute, but really awesome to see where that is going. So that brings us into, let's talk about the newest AI projects that are going on and some big news. So some things I want to highlight here. I want to talk about XAI and what they have done. So really what they've done at XAI, it has kind of been a complete game changer for how the industry works. And I'll go ahead and share this video and just let you see for yourself. But essentially, everyone thought that you could only build a neural network for LLMs up to like 30,000 GPUs. As I mentioned earlier in the pod, basically every single GPU needs to know what every other single GPU is doing when they're training, right? And Elon kind of flipped that on its head with first principles and built the largest training cluster in the world for LLMs, Colossus in Memphis, that has 100,000 of these NVIDIA GPUs connected. And so here's an interesting clip from the All In podcast kind of going over this.
That was a last minute ad for this. But I would have said there were all these articles that were being published in the summer saying that no one believed he was going to be able to do it. It was hype. It was, ridiculousness. And that was coming. The reason the reporters felt comfortable writing those silly stories is because engineers at Meta and Google and other firms were saying, we can't do it. There's no way he can do it. He did it. And I think the world really only believed it when, Jensen did that podcast, I think with, wasn't it with Gerstner?
It might have been with Gerstner.
Yeah, I think it was with Gerstner, and said what Elon did was superhuman. No one else could have done it. And I actually think you can argue that Elon doing that in a lot of ways kind of saved NVIDIA from a tough 6-month period when Blackwell was delayed, because everyone who was waiting for Blackwell and thought it was impossible to make 100,000 hoppers coherent rushed out and bought a lot of hoppers to try and do it themselves. Now we will see if someone else is able to do it. It was really, really hard. No one else thought it was possible.
Exactly. So that brings us to, let's hear exactly what Jensen had to say on this, right?
Of concept to building a massive factory, liquid cooled, energized, permitted in the short time that was done, that is like superhuman.
Right.
And as far as I know, there's only one person in the world who could do that.
Right.
I mean, Elon is singular in this understanding of engineering and construction and large systems and marshaling resources. It's unbelievable. And of course, then his engineering team is extraordinary. And from the moment that we decided to go, the planning with our engineering team, our networking team, our infrastructure computing team, the software team, all of the preparation in advance, then all of the infrastructure, all of the logistics and the amount of technology and equipment that came in on that day to training, 19 days. 19 days is incredible. Mm-hmm. But it's also kind of nice to just take a step back and just, do you know how many days 19 days is? It's just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, right.
And the mountain of technology, if you were to see it, is unbelievable. All of the wiring and the networking and just getting this mountain of technology integrated and all the software, incredible.
Right.
Yeah. So I think what Elon and the X team did, what they achieved is singular. Never
Right.
been done before. Just to put in perspective, 100.
Yeah, so there you have it, right? So basically, yeah, since then you've seen Anthropic, you've seen OpenAI, you've seen Meta, you've seen all the other players rushing out and building up bigger compute clusters. And we're actually going to see if this works. This might not work, but why wouldn't it be better, right? I mean, we're going from like 30,000 up to 100,000, and there has been significant scaling laws in the performance of these LLMs as you increase the size of the training network. So sometime this month in December or January, we're expected to see this model come out, and it could be at state-of-the-art levels of performance. So really cool. And this is typical Elon, like he did at SpaceX, looking at first principles. How can we make it more affordable, more realistic to go to space? Well, how can we lower the cost of getting to space and getting things to space? Well, if we reuse the rocket, we can cut the cost 10x or whatever it is. And it seems he just, pulls these engineering tricks out of a hat, right? I mean, obviously he has incredible engineers who work for him because he attracts that type of talent, but they were able to kind of look at this problem and design a new way to network these GPUs so that he could get 100,000 of them working together, each one knowing what the other GPU, every single other GPU in the network was doing. Really cool. I don't know. What do you think about this, Emmanuel?
I mean, it kind of reflects Elon's personality. I mean, if we see all the things that, I mean, like you mentioned, and this is the first thought I had in my mind as well. If you see what he did, what he's done with SpaceX, I mean, also how he started Tesla, the nature of what he does is just, I mean, it's crazy, including what he's done now with XAI. So, I mean, obviously it's amazing and it's surprising what he's accomplished, but then at the same time, I'm like, like if you heard this news without even ever knowing who's ever done it, you'd immediately say the only person who could have done it is Elon Musk. So, yeah.
Yeah, so excited to see that model come out and see, the performance. Which brings us into another recently released model. Gemini released 1.5 Flash, and we actually have some data here on the performance of this. I think, let me go ahead and share that for you to see. So the cool thing is Gemini 1.5 Flash, obviously being faster and smaller, outperforms the previous Pro model on every single benchmark. This might be a little small for you to see, but general purpose went from 75% to 76%, code 85 to 92 on this benchmark, 54 to 56, 34 to 35. And it's just amazing to see these models are getting more lightweight, they're getting faster, and they're getting better. We are in the early days of LLMs and what they're going to be able to do. So really cool to see Gemini kind of taking a big step really to establish themselves lately. You're starting to see strong performance. Really stumbled out of the gate with their first releases that blew up all over the internet, being overly tuned towards DEI. And now you're starting to see the engineering prowess of Google kind of kick in, and they really seem to be making some good momentum. I mean, Google is an incredible company. They're training these on chips that they've designed and built. They've got all their own technology and all their own engineers. So really incredible to see. So we got two really interesting Google stories this week with Willow and with Gemini coming in. And then I just wanted to personally highlight Claude from Anthropic. Still today, this is my favorite model for developing software as a software engineer, and what I recommend to all of the engineers at SlashDev. If we just dive in and kind of take a look, you might think like the regular chat is cool, but what's really cool about Claude is this projects view, right? So rather than copying and pasting your code into the chat as you go, you can add your whole code base here file by file and then chat with it, which makes it really easy to keep your project organized, come back to it, start a new chat, work on your back end, work on whatever sort of system you're working on, your front end. And Claude has significantly better performance on many programming tasks than ChatGPT. And so I've really found this to be the go-to for developing software. I have played around a bit with Cursor and Copilot and some of the more code editor native desktop tools, but I just haven't found them to be as robust as Claude when it comes to programming. So really highly recommend checking out Claude projects if you're looking to build software faster. Believe it or not, there's still lots of software engineers that wonder if AI is useful for programming, and they're just not embracing these tools fast enough. It's clear as day. Google is producing about a quarter or so of their code with AI. Top companies are using this. It's simply going to build things faster and better than most engineers for most boilerplate code. Even advanced code, solving bugs, you're just going to be working with these every day as a partner as you build applications. So really cool. And Claude projects is definitely something I would recommend to check out. Cool. So now let's talk about hiring software engineers from Mexico and just give a quick overview here. So, Mexico is obviously one of the first places people think of in the US to hire software engineers. You're looking at being able to get a senior software engineer from anywhere from $10 to $20 per hour. On the lower end, obviously, top freelancers can demand much higher rates, but to be competitive with local rates, you can get an engineer for $20 an hour if you know what you're doing with recruiting. You're going to have great time zone overlap if you're in the US. And, you do have pockets of very tech savvy individuals in Mexico. So it is a very attractive place to look for talent. If you're going to recruit all across South America, I would recommend definitely including Mexico. Due to the size, it's definitely got to make the top 10, potentially even the top 5 in Latin America to hire from. But for me personally, I would still see a big gap in the quality of engineers for somewhere like Brazil that we love at SlashDev versus Mexico. Just the quality of engineers is much higher and much more concentrated in Brazil still. And you're even going to be able to get at or lower the rate that you're going to be able to get in Mexico. So great place to look for freelance talent. Definitely include it. You can find great people everywhere. So, the best person you find could be in a very small country or an island nation, but you just got to get out there and recruit around the world to find them. Hiring an engineer in Los Angeles or New York is a very expensive bet for most startups that are looking to get traction. So why not look to hire a remote engineer from somewhere like Mexico, where you can get much more value and really get your product to market fast, especially if you empower these engineers with AI tools. So that's what I would say about hiring engineers in Mexico. Just a quick overview for you. Always feel free to reach out to us at slashdev.io if you have any questions about hiring. Yeah, great. Really good topics this week. Exciting content. Thanks for the time, Emmanuel. And yeah, it's time for us to get back to building. So thanks, everyone. Cheers.